Hi there, my name is Daryl Boone, and this is Board Gems, my weekly video series in which I highlight an older game, not necessarily crazy old, but one that most hobbyists will have moved on from now. It's like, oh, that's old news, let's play the new stuff. And I just like to highlight some of these old games. You know, guys, these old games are actually really good. We should still be playing them. But in many cases, the hobby has moved on from them. So this week, I'm going to cover a game called Uptown. Now, it was originally published in the late 2000s by Fun Again and designed by Corey Heath. It is for 2 to 5 players, although the 2-player game involves each player playing 2 different colors, which I don't personally find that very satisfying, so I never play this with 2 players. I would always play something else if I could. So to me, it's a 3 to 5 player game. Ages 8 and up, which is pretty fair, and takes about a half hour to play, maybe a touch longer if you're playing with a full complement of players. This was released as more of like a hobby release, but it did come out a little bit later, a couple years later, in a more mass market edition as Blockers. Now, this version is from Briar Patch. I know in Germany it was published by Amigo and maybe Griffin Games or Eagle Griffin Games in English in North America. So it's a mass market edition. I'll talk a little bit more about the differences in the editions later. But first I'm going to show you how it plays. I'm going to use my Uptown edition because that's my own personal edition. However, I am going to teach the rules for Blockers as opposed to the ones that came in this box. They're almost identical. There's just a little bit of difference in rules in scoring at the end of the game. I personally like the new rules a little bit more, so I play my old edition with the newer rules. That's what I'm going to teach you, and then afterwards I'll go over why I think it's a board gem. To set up the game, place the board in the middle of the table. Each player gets all the tiles of a single color, mixes them all up face down, and then draws 5 into their rack as their starting hand. Play is clockwise. On a player's turn, players are going to play a tile to a space on the board and then draw a single tile to replace it, so they have a hand of 5 again. And what the player is trying to do, as they're adding tiles to the board, is to connect these tiles up into groups and to have as few groups as possible on the board. There's actually 2 different scoring rules for the end of the game. I'm going to teach you the updated one, which comes with Blockers, as opposed to this one that comes with Uptown. However, they both, in general, work the same way in that in both cases, you're trying to have as few groups as possible on the board. So what do we mean by a group? Well, any tile all by itself is considered to be one group. So this is 2 groups. But it's any tiles connected together, orthogonally, not diagonally. So this would actually be 2 groups, and this is 1. The most important thing for scoring at the end is you want to have as few groups as possible on the board. Each group adds 1 to your score, and you want as low a score as possible. Now, each player has 28 tiles. If a player plays a letter tile, it must go in one of the 9 spaces in the row matching that letter. There's 9 of those. If players play a number tile, it must go in one of the 9 spaces in the column matching that number. As you can see, there are 9 numbers. And finally, if a player has a symbol tile, it must be played on one of the 9 spaces in the area showing that symbol. Each player also has 1 wild tile, which in this edition is a $sign, and that can represent any letter, number, or symbol. And in the standard rules, this just gets mixed up with the other tiles at the beginning of the game. Advanced players can look at having a variant, but I won't teach that now. So in general, you're going to be playing a tile to an empty space on the board, but it is also possible to capture tiles. So let me show you how that works. First, we're going to add a bunch of tiles onto the board here. So let's say it's yellow's turn. Yellow has 2 separate groups on the board, blue only has 1. Yellow would very much like to connect them. Maybe yellow can play some tiles here to be able to do so. Or not. Maybe other players will play tiles there to block. So another thing yellow can do is capture a tile. And capturing a tile is done exactly the same way as playing a tile. You're simply playing a tile onto a space that already has another player's tile on it. So in this case, yellow could capture this tile. Yellow would need an F or a 5 or a city symbol, which yellow's already played their city symbol, but a letter or a number would work. If yellow has the 5, for example, yellow could replace this tile. Now, as you can see, yellow has a group of a single group of 5 tiles. This is much better than having 2 separate groups. Now, yellow keeps this tile and puts it face up in front of them. Now, this is important because at the end of the game, there can be some penalties added to your score. Remember, you want as low a score as possible based on the tiles that you've captured. I'll explain that at the end. Now, you can only capture a tile if it doesn't cause the other player's score to increase. Remember, increasing score is bad. In other words, to have more groups on the board than they did before the capture. So right now, yellow has 2 groups and blue has 1. If yellow captures this tile, blue still has 1 group. So that's a valid capture, that's allowed. What's not allowed is to capture a tile in the middle, basically. Capturing this tile, for example, would cause blue's group to split from 1 into 3, and that's not allowed. So you can only capture tiles on the edges of the groups as opposed to in the middle. Now we'll fast forward to the end of the game. The game ends when all the tiles in the draw piles are gone. So each player has 5 tiles in their hand, but none left to draw. In this case, each player gets 1 more turn. They're going to play one of their 5 tiles from their rack, and then that'll be their last turn. So at the end of the game, they'll only have 4 tiles in their rack that they haven't played onto the board. And then we total up the score. Now the basic score, again, these are the rules for blockers, not Uptown. You should apply them to Uptown too. I think it's a better rule set. What you're going to do is you're going to total up the number of groups. So right now blue has 1 and yellow has 2. Of course, there'll be lots more tiles on the board. But you're also going to add tiles based on which ones you've captured. So I'm going to add a bunch of tiles here, which represent the tiles that blue has captured over the course of the game. So let's say something like this. Whatever's blue's score is on the board, blue is going to add to that the number of tiles they've captured in the color they've captured the most of. In this case, blue looks at all the tiles that they've captured and sees that they've captured the most yellow and counts the number of yellow, 3. That number is going to be added to their score. Being bad, you want a low score. If it was a tie, then it doesn't matter, just pick one of them. Anyway, the number you add is 2. In this case, the number you add is 3. So it's not always advantageous to capture. It's a positional thing to do. But capturing too many times, especially from the same player over and over again, can really hurt your score. So many players total up their scores, and the player with the lowest score wins. That's it. You're ready to play Uptown and blockers. Now I want to mention the difference in the endgame scoring between the 2 editions. In Uptown, the original rules were that the winner is the player who has the fewest groups on the board, period. And only if it's a tie do you look at the number of tiles captured, and whoever captured the most tiles loses that tie. And in blockers, instead, they've, as maybe you've seen in the how to play video earlier, in blockers, that tile capturing is actually a part of the scoring. So it actually discourages you from doing it too much. I find in the original rules for this, it was very punishing because players would capture because the ultimate goal is to have as few groups as possible. And really, whatever you have to do to get to that is what you do. So there'd be players who would just capture like crazy and try to get their groups as low as possible. And it also kind of maybe telegraphs the end a little bit, because if one person tries really, really hard to get as few groups as possible and are capturing tiles left, right, and center, but it becomes obvious that they are not going to be able to do it, and they got a ton of tiles in front of them, then they know they're going to lose. Anyway, I happen to like the new rules for blockers a little bit better. It's very easy to move those rules over to this one. It's just or change in scoring. There's no change in components or anything like that. Now, I do want to talk about why I think this is a board gem. Uh, Obviously, like a lot of the board gems I cover, the rules are really, really simple. So you can pretty much explain this to everyone. And it is a very interactive game. You are definitely playing against other players. You're on a shared board and everybody's placing tiles and everybody has the same goal, but you're all trying to do it on the same surface, on the same playing area. And as a result, everybody's getting in each other's way. It's actually, the name blockers is a little bit misleading because it's not really about blocking other players. You got your own problems to deal with. But you don't want to be blocked yourself. And it's very easy for players who are playing their own game to end up blocking other players just by accident. So it doesn't feel unfair in that aspect. I always like games that just have just the tiniest little bit of interaction in that it might be just a hint of negative interaction. You could do that in this game, but it doesn't feel very personal, this sort of negative interaction, because you are blocking other players. Or at the very least, I find what you can do is you can just make it more expensive for the other player. It's like, oh yeah, okay, no, I know you want to connect these two. I'm going to put this tile here, and now it's expensive for you to do so because you have to capture my tile in order to do it. It's really, that's all it is. And the competition is natural because everybody's trying to do the same thing on the same board. So there's a bit of negative interactivity, but again, it's not personal, and it's just because it's a small space and everybody's got to elbow and try to get enough space for themselves. I think this is a charming game. I really do. I'm glad to see it get a mass market edition. Now the mass market edition has a plastic board with raised edges, which keeps the tiles in place. The old version, Uptown, as you may have seen, is just a flat board with cardboard tiles that just sit on the space. It's nice when the tiles can lock in. I mean, I used to play Scrabble. My parents were huge Scrabble nuts. And of course they had a deluxe edition with the plastic grid that kept all the tiles in place, and that was the way to play. I mean, that was lovely. But at the same time, I'm not very messy when I play Uptown, right? It's like, oh my god, I can't keep all the tiles in place. They're all over the place. It's completely fine. And for me, the small size of this edition really makes it for me. When you have a big collection like I do, you want to save shelf space when possible. So as you can see, Uptown is much smaller than Blockers. And there's like that. Uptown and Blockers is, to me, a Goldilocks game. Now, I want to explain what that term means, how I use it. A Goldilocks game, to me, is a game that's for 3 to 5 players and doesn't really scale the experience amongst the different possible player ranges. So the 3-player game and the 5-player game have the exact same rules, but because the game is very interactive, maybe it's on a shared space, the game feels very different. So a game that as you play with 3 players might be very open, there's lots of room to do what you want, but as a result maybe feels less tense. Whereas a 5-player game, you're elbowing each other, you're just in everybody's way, and it's hard to get to do what you want because there's so much change by the time your turn comes around again, more punishing. For a lot of people, for a lot of hobbyists, that's the way to play it, right? You want the most vicious play possible. But I called it a Goldilocks game, not because it's best with 4 players necessarily, that's a matter of personal opinion, but at least that experience feels scaled for 4 players. So it feels like 4 players is the natural way to play, and 3 players has the same rules but feels a little bit more open, and 5 players has the same rules but feels a little more closed, a little less open, a little more restrictive. And so 4 players is kind of, it feels like the natural state of the game. Uptown and Blockers is a Goldilocks game to me. 4 players is probably the best way to play. Having said that, I play 3 players all the time. My family is 3, my wife and son and me, and we play this 3-player. It works completely fine. In fact, probably the newer rules for Blockers work a little bit better for the lower player counts, in my opinion. So that's Uptown, and it's a board gem for me. This is a game that's going to be staying in my collection, I think, for a long time. I really enjoy this game. My family does too. My son is a bit of a savant at the game. It's very hard to beat him. He's very good at the game, but at the same time, he doesn't like the game all that much. Maybe he solved it in his head. I don't know, but it's still a really great experience. Really easy to learn, and like I said, it's very interactive. You're definitely working against each other on a shared board, and while you can get in each other's way, it never feels personal. So it just has a lot of good things going for it. And one thing that I happen to like quite a bit too is I feel like there's a really good balance between the luck and the tactics, the luck and the strategy. There isn't a lot of strategy in this game. It is all, these are the tiles I have, what can I do with them? But there are still definitely decisions to make. You only have 5 tiles, but each tile has several different places it can be placed. And while you can't plan too far ahead because you only have 5 tiles, by the time you put a couple on the board, you're getting new ones, and then you're reevaluating, okay, what can I do with these now? And so it's a constantly changing puzzle. A puzzle, of course, that other players can interfere with. So I really like that aspect of the game. The only part which maybe feels a little bit unfair is the wild tile. The wild tile is, by the rules, mixed in with all the others, and which works fine, except that it can be critical. It could be a critical part of the game as to when that comes out. Ideally, the wild tile comes out in the middle of the game. If you get it too early, you don't really need it because the board is still wide open. There's still lots of places to play your regular tiles, so you don't really need the wild tile yet, but still to hang on to it will take up a space on your rack. Whereas if you get it too late, you might not have a good opportunity to use it anymore. In fact, the way the rules are written, it's possible you may never get a chance to play the wild tile. That's not true. You will you will always see the wild tile by the end of the game, because you'll have your rack will be full and all the tiles will be drawn. So worst case, you get the wild tile at the end and you have one more turn to play it. Having said that, maybe it's too late at that point. So there are some variants. There's a variant on BGG. It might be an official variant, I'm not sure, on Board Game Geek, that just talks about having that wild tile open, not face up, not mixed in with the other tiles, and you can choose when that comes into play. So if you're concerned at all about the luck, just do that. It's a pretty simple change. I really like Uptown. It's going to be in my collection for a long time. It's a board gem for me. Thanks for watching, and remember, old games like Uptown don't stop being good just because new games come out. Take care.